What is going on, everyone? We are about to get into Thomas Sowell on the effects of victimology. Let's check it out.
Tom Sowell, for once I'm going to quote a column you wrote instead of basic economics, but we'll come back to this book. A column you wrote earlier this month. Nicholas Kristof, columnist for the New York Times, got under your skin, and not for the first time. Readers of your column will know. New York Times writer Nicholas Kristof, I'm quoting you, asserts that there is you're quoting him, overwhelming evidence that centuries of racial subjugation still shape inequity in the 21st century, quote, closing quote, and he mentions, open quote, the lingering effects of slavery, close quote. And now this is Tom Sowell. If we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state.
Yes.
Explain that.
Well, in 1960, which would be almost 100 years after the end of slavery, 22% of black kids grew up in homes with only one parent.
Just 22%?
Yes.
4 out of 5 were in homes with both parents?
Yes. 30 years later, after the liberal welfare state, that number had more than tripled. And so I said, well, let us compare, if we can speculate on how much that 22% was due to the legacy of slavery. But we know that that tripling was not due to the legacy of slavery. It was due to the legacy of a whole different set of policies. And you can look at it so many other ways. Education. Stuyvesant High School in New York, as you know, you get into only by passing a very tough exam. In 2012, the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School was less than 1/10 of the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School 33 years earlier.
I didn't know that.
There's Dunbar High School in Washington, which was an elite black high school for a very long time. In 1993, the number of kids out of Dunbar High School who went
I was 2 years old then.
on to college was less than it was 60 years earlier, which would have been in the depth of the Great Depression. And so you can run through a whole bunch of other things like that. Look at the housing projects. The housing projects in the first half of the 20th century, during that first 100 years after slavery, did not have the high crime rates, the murder rates, the graffiti, all the rest of it that we associate. None of that was there. People, like the New York Times, Kristof should read his own old papers, pointed out that on Saturday mornings, it was common in the housing project of this earlier era for parents to leave their doors unlocked because some of the parents could afford television, some couldn't. So the ones who had television would leave their doors unlocked, and the kids from the other families could come down there and watch television with them. Well, now the latest figures show that most people below the poverty line have 2 television sets and cable, but they wouldn't dare leave their doors unlocked in a public housing project.
I'm
quoting that column again. Liberals have wreaked.
Did he really did he explain why that didn't change? I mean, I understand the year difference, but why did it change? Why did it turn from, all right, you welcome in my home to you not?
More havoc on blacks than the supposed legacy of slavery they talk about.
Yes.
You don't mean that hyperbolically.
No, I do not.
You mean it.
Yeah, and another thing, crime and violence. Now we take it for granted that there's tremendous levels of crime and violence in the black community. That was not always the case. In the 20s, it was very common for white celebrities, including George Gershwin and William Faulkner, to go up to Harlem not only for entertainment places, but to go into private homes of people they knew. And Gershwin played Rhapsody in Blue in this home where Walter White lived. Milton Friedman, when he was a graduate student at Columbia, he and the lady he later married would go dancing at the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. And he said, we had no fear of being mugged or accosted on the street or anything like that.
I've heard you say, Tom, when you were a boy growing up in Harlem yourself, your own neighborhood felt totally safe to you.
Not totally safe. I wouldn't exaggerate, but there's nothing resembling today. I mean, I did sleep on hot nights. I would sleep out on the fire escape. When I tell people in Harlem that today, they think I'm from another galaxy, you know. But that people slept on the fire escapes in New York and in the public parks in the 30s, all over the city. Because it was not a jungle. There was a lady. One other example. There was a woman who was a black woman in Harlem who was an actress. She'd go down to the theater district.
I just don't see myself sleeping outside nowhere. But he talks about, I guess, how hot it was. So maybe AC wasn't around back then. I'm not sure, but wow, this is deep.
And then after the play, you know, they'd have their drinks and eat something or whatever. She said at 1 o'clock in the morning, she would simply get on the subway and go on up to Harlem and walk home from there. Now, it so happens that the subway station she got off at was very near a grocery store where I was a delivery boy. And on Saturday nights, I would be working usually until around midnight. And when I would go home, I would go past that very same subway station she's talking about. I never had the slightest trouble.
So if the comparison between progress, simply the decency of of life available to people, they weren't families were intact and schools worked and the neighborhoods were more or less safe. People were able to lead decent lives. If the contrast between that world and the world we inhabit now is owing so directly to liberal policies intended, so we're told, to help African Americans, why do African Americans support the more liberal of the two parties, the Democratic Party, at the rates of 90 and more %? Why is the first African American president so deeply committed to promoting and extending liberal policies? Why is his African American attorney general, again, so deeply committed to affirmative action and other? Why? This makes no sense.
I don't think we could be enough hours for you to answer all of those. But to take the political thing, one of the things I discovered in the research for my book I'm currently working on is that leaders of groups that are lagging in countries around the world almost invariably have counterproductive policies for them. And it makes perfect sense, because insofar as members of lagging groups assimilate into the values and achievements of the larger society, they don't need those leaders. You know, you see this. You look at the history of the Czechs in the 19th century. People are worried that the Czechs are all learning to speak German. Well, at that time, if you wanted to become a professional person, scientist, anything like that, you had to use books that were written in German.
Right. Simply
because the German acquired a volume of literature centuries ahead of Czech. And yet they fought tooth and nail against that. If you look at in Sri Lanka, one of the arguments that was made there to the Buddhist leaders was that if we don't do something, the Tamil minority will assimilate members of the Sinhalese majority, and then there'll be no Buddhists or Sinhalese in another several generations. And so, I mean, there's no mystery to me as to why Jesse Jackson says what he does, or Al Sharpton and others, because that benefits them, but it does not benefit the people they lead, and all the incentives.
I mean, that gotta take courage, all kinds of stuff. I talk about this all the time. When it's one person speaking on a message, like, you know, fully giving a message that God gave them, or that, you know, that's on their heart, whatever, you know what I'm saying? It just shows you how can I put this into text? Like, what it takes for someone to believe in that almost all it takes is for someone to believe in themselves. Like him, Jordan Peterson, you got people that literally are focused on their thought of what they researched, mainly facts every single time. You know what I'm saying? And I just, I mean, maybe it's just the work. Maybe it's just putting in the work, putting in the research. You know what I'm saying? Not everybody does that. Not everybody reads. You feel me? So that could also play a huge part in it. But yeah, that gotta take courage. That gotta take confidence. Stand for something, fall for anything. You feel me? Like that takes a lot to be able to not go against the NAACP, but not agree with what they're doing, but not agree on what they're doing being for who they're doing it for. That's crazy. That's wild right there.
Or for leaders to lead people into things that don't help the people, but help the leaders.
What you'd create there would be an exception for Dr. King, though, wouldn't there?
Yes, but
one of the things he was different because he was earliest, or what? Why? What's different about him?
Well, it's like insurgent movements in general. When an insurgency starts off, by definition, it has an uphill battle. Now, and you can look at the history of Christianity, for heaven's sake. If you're going to be a Christian in the Roman Empire, you know, before in the first century, you had a lot of grief to go through. Now, but after Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire, this is a bonanza. And there's a lot to be done. And so now you will follow policies that are the opposite of what you advocated. You will see that with all kinds of other insurgent movements.
Okay. Last questions. Who was Miss Sheriff?
She was my eighth grade teacher, homeroom teacher.
And tell me the story about getting detention one day.
Well, I was sometimes bored in class, and so I would do various little things to just liven things up, I think is the way to put it. I remember once there was one prank that really got her, and she said, "Oh, if I ever find out who did this, Sowell." I mean, the presumption.
Wow.
As innocent was just not there. And so one afternoon, I'm being kept in after school as per usual, and Miss Sheriff is sitting down there with her papers to work on, and she says, "Well, here we are again, Sowell, just the two of us." And I said, "Good grief, Miss Sheriff, if we keep staying after school together all the time, people will begin to talk." And she said, "We'll just have to live with the scandal." She didn't even look up from her papers.
Okay, now that story, combine that story with this quotation from Basic Economics, where government restricts its economic role to that of an enforcer of laws and contracts. Some people say that such a policy amounts to doing nothing as far as the economy is concerned. However, what is called nothing has taken centuries to achieve.
Yes.
So you put Miss Sheriff together with that quotation from Basic Economics, and you get Tom Sowell's view of the world, which is that human beings are unruly, they need constraints, even as the 8th grade Tom Sowell needed to be punished needed to be kept after school.
There was no Eric Holder to keep them from punishing me. Heaven knows I might have gone into become a criminal.
So your view is that life is hard. Mm-hmm. People are not angels.
No.
They need social structures. They need laws and a government that enforces the law and gives us some stability and civil comedy is doing enough.
In most cases, yes.
In most cases, yes. All right. Another person from your past that I'd like to know about. This is from a recent column. Professor Sterling Brown.
Oh, yes.
Sterling Brown.
Beautiful people. I mean, I think it's like the 3rd book that I've seen that he's written. If you know how many books that Thomas Sowell wrote, type them below right now. Just type how many. And if you're feeling good, type how many with the titles. By Thomas Sowell.
Brown remains as much a hero to me in my old age as he was when I was a freshman at Howard University. He wrote bitterly eloquent attacks on racism. And yet when I was preparing to go off to Harvard, he said to me, "Don't come back here to tell me you didn't make it because white folks were mean."
Yes.
Close quote. Sterling Allen Brown who's known to the rest of us as an important poet, a literary figure, you knew him how? And
I took 2 classes for him. One was in literature, but one was in creative writing. And a number of people who took his classes have gone on to become well-known writers, by the way. I knew nothing. I didn't know he was a writer or anything else when I took his class.
I see. So what did he mean when he said to you, you knew that he knew that racism existed because he wrote about it?
Yes.
And yet he said, what's he saying? He's saying, don't let it hold you back? What is he saying to you?
That's right. And he was essentially burning my bridges behind me so that I wouldn't dare show my face on Howard University campus if I didn't make it at Harvard.
I see. So you can't stand self-pity. Is that part of what's going on here?
Partly, yeah.
And somehow or other, the liberal project plays on pity.
Yes. And in fact, in the book that I'm writing now, I discovered this is true not only in the United States, it's true in England, and the situation is wholly different. And yet, if you read the data, for example, from London, the educational tests and so forth, you see that there, immigrants from Africa pass this test they have. I'm talking about low-income people now. Nearly 60% of the time. Blacks from Caribbean, like 50%, so on. Native-born whites in the same low-income bracket pass this test 30% of the time. And it's the same thing. The foreign people come in, they haven't had generations of being steeped in the welfare state vision, the vision of grievances, victimology, and resentments, the idea that there are enemies out there dedicated to keeping you down. That's the message that's been pumped into the head of the white lower class in Britain, and that's the image that's been pumped into the black low-income people in the United States, and the results are the same in both cases.
What would Sterling Allen Brown want to say to Al Sharpton and the protesters in Ferguson today?
I don't know.
What would you say to them, to Al Sharpton and?
Well, I'm sure it couldn't be repeated on television, but I would say nothing actually.
Why is that?
I am sure that Jesse Jackson makes 10 times as much money a year as I do. And I don't think I should take on the project of convincing somebody to reduce his income by 90%.
Wow. That's crazy right there. Yeah, I guess it did. That's wild. I mean, I just think that takes absolute bravery. That's the word I've been looking for. I mean, courage was a good word, but yeah, I think that's extreme bravery right there. I am your girl VCoop, down piece in the VCoop to be exact. Make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, man. Come over to the Coop Troop Live. Just make sure you hit that notification bell so you can know when we're on. Check out the video that's popping up on your screen right now, as well as my other Tom and Sowell reactions. And if you feeling generous, check out the information right above my head. Feel free to donate. Donos are accepted, not requested. And if you don't have access to the options above, feel free to hit me up through my profile email. And I cannot think of what else I was going to say. Hit that join button below if you want to be a part of the exclusivities. Yeah, hit the join button, become a YouTube member or even a Patreon member. You can find the information in the description. All right, till next time, thank you for joining.